Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Well, we had such a lively discussion last week about An American Werewolf in London, wondering why we hadn't taken so long to get to it, that I think in the middle of that podcast, we decided, we should just do some other werewolf movies that we haven't gotten around to. And really, number 2 on the list is The Howling. Another one that's kind of strange that we haven't gotten to it. Probably just as notorious as American Werewolf in London. Also came out the very same year. In fact, Rick Baker was working on the makeup effects with this when John Landis pulled him away and said, no, you promised you were going to work on my movie. So he left that in the hands of another guy who we'll end up talking about here. And we got, within the same year, actually 3 werewolf movies that all came out. Oddly enough, there was The Howling, there was American Werewolf in London, both of which did really, really well. And then a third one called Wolfen, which I'm thinking maybe we should do after this one because it sounds really interesting. And wouldn't it be sad to do these two and not that one? It didn't get all the love that these two got, but I read that it takes a slightly different take on things and is maybe even just a little more thoughtful and profound than these movies are.
Yeah, and this was like amongst a whole slew of werewolf movies within like a 5-year time span. There were several others, and I was surprised. I mean, I don't know. I just didn't know that the guy who started doing makeup for The Howling got like he had started doing it. He had started designing it, and then he got pulled away to do An American Werewolf in London. I didn't know that, but now having seen this, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of the same techniques, similar designs. One of the only things was in this movie, The Howling, the werewolves are bipedal. They walk around on 2 feet. And that's what you're the guy who knows the names. The original makeup designer or creature designer.
Rick Baker.
Yeah, that's how he envisioned it, and that's how he wanted it. And he wanted to do it that way in American Werewolf in London, too. But Landis was like, no, it's got to be like a hell dog or something.
Hell dog.
It's just kind of fascinating. And this has also been an interesting experience for me because I've never seen this movie. And I don't know how I haven't seen it. It's not like I'm unaware of it. I've always been aware of it. I've seen at least 1 or 2 of the sequels, but I've never seen this.
That's funny. So you have seen a couple of the sequels.
At least 1 or 2. I'm pretty sure I saw there's one that's like The Howling, the original story or the beginning or something like that. Reborn. I don't remember, but it's more faithful to the source novel than this movie is.
That's right. Well, this movie's credited with basically reinventing the werewolf genre, which almost up until this point was a little corny. It was, guys more or less walking around with furry hands and faces. And this took it a little more seriously in terms of the makeup effects and what werewolves might look like. Like you said, American Werewolf in London took it down to basically like a wolf. He's a wolf at the end on all 4s. And this one, there's these giant hulking beasts that are definitely more animal than man, really. I had attempted to watch this movie twice when I was younger. I distinctly remember falling asleep in the middle of it both times. And then some point, I think in college, I was like, I need to rent this movie again at a time when it's not late at night and force myself to stay awake because it's an important movie. I need to see it. But my initial remembrances from those first 2 times were it wasn't quite what I'd expected. I was thinking it was going to be a little more jam-packed. It's got a lot of shit in it. But the pacing is very, very different from what I had expected. And even what I'd remembered. Honestly, I feel like the pacing's all over the place.
It's an odd story, and it strikes a really odd tone. Like all the time, I'm like, what kind of movie is this?
Is it a comedy? Is it?
I know. I mean, I read that they intentionally went for some comedy. Joe Dante, what had he done He'd done some comedy just before this, right?
Well, he did Rock and Roll High School right before this, but He did Piranha years before this. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking of.
Which is definitely more comedic as far as horror goes. And it kind of has to be. Joe Dante, you may or may not remember, got started with Roger Corman.
Yeah.
Actually, I think he did Hollywood Boulevard for Roger Corman. Then he did Piranha a couple years after that. And so he really came out of that school of people we talk about a lot. In fact, Roger Corman has a mini cameo in there. He pops into a phone booth in the very beginning. And so he was very good at shooting things on the cheap and really fast, but trying to milk it out for high quality, and also very much like sort of going for that exploitation sort of fun type movie that's going to get butts and seats and isn't always necessarily going to impress people in the, art community. They're audience pleasers. They do tend to be that way. And Joe Dante's got a great record for that, by the way.
Yeah.
He directed and kind of kicked off the Police Squad TV series, which later became Naked Gun. He did Gremlins after this. We love Gremlins. He even did Explorers, which I think we've talked about how much we loved that movie from the 80s. Inner Space, which is a movie that still holds up today.
Yeah, there was a period right there in the 80s where he was cranking out stuff that I really liked.
The Burbs.
So, and he's continued to do stuff. He is still working in horror anthologies. He's often invited to direct. And wasn't he the one who directed that segment of The Twilight Zone where a bunch of people died?
No, that was John Landis, ironically enough, who we talked about last week. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. We didn't bring that up in American Werewolf in London, did we? No.
But didn't talk about it.
This project was very much a director-for-hire type project. There was a theater distributor who was very interested in producing more movies, and he had optioned the rights to this book because he was a big Stephen King fan. And this book that this was based on got a great blurb from Stephen King on it. Although Joe Dante himself was not a fan of the source material. I think he said it was pretty corny, pretty cheesy.
He criticized it publicly and frequently, and once accidentally in front of the guy who wrote it. I thought that was a pretty funny anecdote. Some guy in the audience so you didn't like the book? No, I really didn't. Oh, well, I wrote it.
Sorry, sir.
Well, I mean, there were good parts.
Right. Well, there were a couple goes at this. There was a script that had been written by Jack Conrad. There was another script, a version of it. Joe Dante eventually hired John Sayles. And John Sayles has been a very successful writer. Of course, he also came out of the Roger Corman school. He did write Piranha. We did Alligator, which he wrote as well. I don't know if you ever saw Battle Beyond the Stars, that Star Wars knockoff that Corman did, but a lot of people really hold that dear in their heart. And I actually think it's a really fun movie. He wrote that too. And then later he went on to write and direct a lot of things. He did some rewrites on Apollo 13. He wrote and directed Lone Star. I don't know if you remember that with Matthew McConaughey. He also has a little cameo in this. He's the guy who is the mortician assistant or whatever, who kind of has a goofy scene there.
There are a bazillion cameos in this movie.
There are
also a bazillion winks and nods about wolves and werewolves. I mean, it would take us all day to point them all out. If you are really interested, and I found it very fascinating because, again, I hadn't seen the movie before, but I caught a lot of them. You can't help but catch them because they're everywhere.
Yes.
The Three Little Pigs cartoon with the wolf on the TV. Somebody's reading Allen Ginsberg's Howl.
There's just Wolf brand chili.
Absolutely everywhere. And it was fun. It was kind of a fun little, like that page, my favorite page in Highlights magazine, where it's find all these different objects. That's what this movie felt like.
It kind of once you realized they were doing it, then you kind of started looking for it, and you were not disappointed. It happened a lot, which is part of how you could easily tell this movie wasn't taking itself very seriously. Whereas on the other hand, there were moments when the movie very much felt like it was going for some serious heady drama. The way that it kicks off, that was something else.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm like, what kind of movie am I watching? It starts out so seedy. Another reason that I can't believe that I haven't seen this movie is because it stars a gorgeous, young Dee Wallace, who I am in love with.
You're one of your all-time favorites.
She's amazing, and she is so beautiful. in this movie. She's just young and fresh and gorgeous. And she plays this like on-air news personality or reporter or whatever. And she's like undercover trying to meet with a serial killer. Right? Like,
yeah.
it's so, and so she's like in a really seedy part of town. I have no idea where this is supposed to be.
I think it's like basically Times Square, New York, which was very, very seedy in the 80s.
Right.
It's interesting because I like the fact that it throws you right into the action without explaining it all for you right away. Like you almost feel like you've jumped in and you've missed some stuff, you know, like you just jumped into a movie. And I liked that because I was immediately engaged. It was a little bit of a puzzle that you sort of had to unpack what was going on. But the gist of it is that she's a news reporter and there had been this string of murders going on, unsolved. But she, I guess because she's a prominent public figure, had been getting phone calls from this guy. And so because she'd been getting phone calls from this guy, they set up a little kind of trap for him there where she's connected to radio. And I guess the police were involved, but initially it doesn't seem that way.
No, it's terribly planned. There is no like support for her anywhere.
There's nobody nearby.
No, it's only like when they kind of lose her feed, like her mic goes out and they're like, oh, well, we better call the cops. And so they call the cops and the cops are like, we'll find her. She's wearing purple. I feel like I would regret it if I didn't say that before any of this ever happened. The opening credits are 2.5 minutes long and it's all just like, it looks like an old school TV feed that's so fuzzy that you can't see anything at all. And just a bunch of like disparate audio clips, which I believe are clips from the rest of the movie. And like,
really?
I think it is because you hear her voice and you hear other characters who we will come to meet later. You just hear little tiny clips of things that are happening. And oftentimes it's people in distress. And I was intrigued. I'm like, I feel like, why am I hearing these things that I'm sure I'm going to hear again later?
It was super compelling. I mean, you know, I don't know. It was just kind of a brilliant little bit of opening because there's nothing to see.
Right.
Although it kind of reminded me of when I used to turn to that special channel, you know, on TV that was all scrambled and just sit there for, you know, quite a while, try to see if I could make anything
10,
out.
15 minutes.
No, who knows? However long it takes. Let's put it that way. And and so, you know, visually, you're kind of thinking maybe there will be something that you'll see, a blip of one thing or another. So you're kind of engaged there. But then the audio, like you said, is all these clips that are interesting and that you kind of want to hear. Again, you feel like you're supposed to piece something together. Really, really great way to bring you in. And then, like I said, take you right into this, and you know something important is going on, because even though you're not quite sure yet what it all amounts to, everybody's walking by this woman and telling her, oh, you're so brave. You're so brave to do this. And then they go to this guy who later turns out to be, is it her husband or just her boyfriend? I was never clear on that.
I don't know. I think it's her husband. I think at least he refers to her as his wife at some point.
Yeah.
But then I could have sworn that Meshach Taylor showed up for 2 seconds and said that he was her husband.
Huh?
I don't know. I was confused.
Yeah. Well, it is. It is confusing.
Ultimately, they are a couple in the movie. Whether they are legitimately husband and wife, I don't know. But he's played by Christopher Stone, who they were engaged he and Dee Wallace were engaged at the time and were married for some time because she took his name. She was Dee Wallace Stone for some time.
Well, I read a little bit of trivia here in that the producers of the movie didn't even realize they had a relationship when they cast him. She and he were living together, and they were having a hard time finding a man to play opposite her that was just the right person. And she said, well, you know, I have worked with this guy. I think his last name is S. It's like Stone or Smith or something. And so she referred him just so that she would have no, you know, influence on the proceedings. So he auditioned and got the part all on his own. And then the producer calls up and thinks he's calling this guy, and she answers the phone. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I must have dialed the wrong number. But anyway, you know that guy you recommended? We're going to cast him. He's great. And she said, oh, actually, you didn't get the wrong number. And there was a moment. And she jumped back in and said, well, at least you only need to have one trailer.
That's funny. I hadn't read that.
they had acted together in Cujo before this. They were.
I thought, wasn't Cujo after this? I thought
Oh,
Cujo
you know
was
what? You're right.
84.
No, you're right. Cujo was actually 83. Cujo was after this, but they had acted together. Were they together in The Hills Have Eyes or The Stepford Wives?
I don't know. I kind of recognized him, and he's been in so much. But that's another thing about this movie that I can't believe I haven't seen it. Like every minute or two, I'm like, there's somebody else that I recognize from something. And like when Dick Miller popped up, and it all makes sense. It's all the Roger Corman connection, I feel like. And then Joe Dante continued that tradition by continuing to work with the same people over and over again. So even in like bit parts, small parts, there are so many familiar faces. And for somebody like me who has seen all of these movies, it's such a treat. Like I so enjoyed watching this, but it's so weird. Like it starts out like Dee Wallace is like super pretty and soft, and then she is in this terrible part of town and she has to go. She talks to the killer apparently on a payphone, and he tells her to meet him at a porn store. So she does, and she's totally by herself. And she goes there and she goes into one of those shady ass back rooms alone. And this creepy ass guy is in there and starts showing her rape porn.
Yeah.
I was like, what? What is happening?
It's a very adult and intense.
The tone is so weird because it's hard to tell whether she's scared or into it or both.
Right.
Like, it kind of seems like she's kind of into it.
It had a very Brian De Palma vibe. Like, the very beginning of it, I felt like I was watching a Brian De Palma movie. Really, with these close-ups on her and kind of the soft focus and the guy in the darkness and this mystery and these very intense score, too. The score with this movie was very all over the place as well. And it was scored by, he's an Italian guy, probably had a lot of experience scoring a lot of these giallo and other kind of pictures that we've done. Pino Donaggio. You know, here, again, very intense, very cinematic, orchestral, suspenseful kind of score. And then there are other times when it's just like kind of bouncy and goofy. He scored The Seed of Chucky, by the way, which we did recently. No wonder. Now, I just found this out just now as I looked it up, but he scored two of Brian De Palma's movies, Dressed to Kill and Body Double.
Oh.
So that makes perfect sense. We even talked about how Seed of Chucky, the score was quite good in there. So he scored this, and he scored Piranha. He scored Tourist Trap, which we've also done. So
the score for that was wild.
Yeah.
It was all just like,
So then it goes through this, and she has this intense experience, and the cops do end up showing up.
And she gets attacked. Like, ultimately, he attacks her, but, like, he's talking to her, and he's talking about the porn. He's like...
She didn't feel a thing, Karen. None of them do. They're not real, the people here. They're dead. They could never be like me. But you're different, Karen. I watch you on TV, and I know how good I can make you feel. I'm gonna light up your whole body, Karen.
And then his voice changes. He's like, and you can turn around now.
Right.
And she does. And she looks at him, and we only see like her reaction, which again is horrified and aroused.
Yeah. And we do see like a glimpse in the shadow of him, kind of almost a little bit of a werewolf silhouette. It does give a little bit of that away.
He just kind of looks like a really hairy guy. like, I mean, we know he's a werewolf. We know this is a werewolf movie, but he's not. And that's another thing about this movie. Like, the effects are really great, but one of the things that I like about it are the various stages of wolfing out. Like, it's very gradual, and they can be like a wolf, like a giant walking on two legs wolf. But sometimes they're just a little hairy faced and yellow eyed. But I like that. I like that it's kind of like It's not just you're a werewolf. It's a gradual kind of thing. And they all look great. The effects all look great in this. There are so many things to talk about. I don't know how to approach this. She starts having lots of nightmares. She talks to this therapist. This is important. His name is Dr.
Wagner.
Dr. Wagner.
She's traumatized. Seriously traumatized.
She's very traumatized. She's having nightmares. She's a TV personality, but they have to take her off the air because she like freezes on camera. And Dr. Wagner tells her that she needs to go to the colony. Is that what it was called?
Yep.
It's like a rest retreat.
Yeah, for his patients.
It's hilarious.
You can totally see where this is going a mile away, right?
I guess.
So I'm just sitting back and waiting for it to all unfold. And everybody in this colony is weird as hell.
They're so weird.
It sounded like the outdoor hippie retreat version of getting sent to the insane asylum, you know, in a lot of these movies.
I mean, at first glance, it seems like fun. Like they're having like a beach party and they're barbecuing and people are, you know, there's music and they're dancing and stuff and it seems fun. And then you start to meet every individual and they're all just weird as hell.
Yeah.
My other favorite thing about this party is not only is it a barbecue, but every person is like holding a huge hunk of meat on the bone and just gnawing at it.
That's right. It's so obvious. It's hilarious. And we get John Carradine in here. So he's like this weird-ass old guy. This was the same year, by the way, that Monster Club came out as well. Remember him and Vincent Price?
Oh, God.
In the beginning of Monster Club?
I had to look him up because I know the name Carradine. You know, he was famous. His sons were famous. I know they're famous. The reason that I recognized his name, but I recognized his voice more than I recognized his appearance because he looks kind of weird and scary in this movie.
Yeah.
But I recognized his voice and I'm scrolling and I get to The Secret of Nim and he was the great owl in The Secret of Nim. And I'm like, that's it. That's that voice. That's why I know that voice.
That's right.
And I was giddy about that.
He's got a similar kind of role in The Sentinel, which is a movie that is so on the list that I really want to do sometime. We could have a lot to say about that one. It's quite interesting. Yeah, he goes back to the 30s. And
yeah. He was in The Grapes of Wrath.
Oh, yeah.
Great character in that movie.
But the Monster Club, just the same time this year, he looked exactly the same when we were doing the Monster Club.
And he's crazy and weird. Everybody's crazy and weird. He's just kind of mumbling to himself about nonsense. I don't know. And then there's like this crazy, exotic, horny woman.
Yeah. The nymphomaniac, Marcia.
She is so funny. She's so over the top. It's hilarious. I love her. And she's constantly like looking at people, like just giving them like death stare. Like she's just giving intense gaze all the time. And she's super horny. And even the people who are being friendly are like overly friendly in that culty way. Like, oh, you're going to be so happy here. Everything's so great. Like it's we're the greatest little community ever. Like this is weird. And why did she come here? I mean, I guess she was told to go there by her doctor, but why is her husband like, I guess it's like a couples retreat for them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, well, of course, we later find out, if it hasn't become obvious already, that these people are actually all werewolves. This is a colony of or whatever you call a pack of werewolves, all led up by the doctor. I mean, am I just going to spoil it now?
I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's what it is.
I think it's so obvious at this point, and I don't think he's trying very hard to hide it either. I think this is part of the comedy of the movie, is these funny little background references to werewolves are running right alongside this very obvious, all these people are strange and acting weird and eating meat, and we know we're watching a werewolf movie. At the same time that this is going on, there's this parallel story, which apparently wasn't in the novel.
That couple, Terry and Chris?
Terry and Chris.
Yeah. And
yeah.
Chris is the dad from Can't Buy Me Love. That was driving me nuts.
Oh, yeah.
I knew I recognized him, but I couldn't figure it out.
And he's also the director of like half of everything Adam Sandler's ever put out.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't see that.
Like Happy Gilmore, Big Daddy, Don't Mess with This. Yeah, he started out as an actor, and he still does a little bit of acting now and then, but like he's done almost as much directing as he's done acting nowadays. Mostly comedies. Cool guy, actually. I liked him in this movie. I mean, again, it was like these two people are doing this investigation where they go to the house. And I don't understand how this can even happen, right?
I don't even know who they are. Do they work for the TV station?
Yeah, they were there.
Because they're doing all this investigation that police should be doing. Like, where are the police?
That's my point. They literally break into the house of this guy who attacked her in the porno theater, which we didn't say, but the cops sprung in and just blindly shot through the door of that porno booth. Thank God they didn't hit her. Shot this guy, Eddie, and so he's dead, supposedly. So they they break into his apartment, I guess, before the police get there, and find all these sketches that he's done. And they're all of werewolves and people in half transformation. And there's a picture of her there, the sketch that he's done, and a sketch of like a lake. It's like a seaside.
Yeah, a coastline.
And they collect all these things and keep them for themselves, and then presumably call the police. Then they go to the morgue, and there's a goofy morgue guy who is John Sayles. He's got a hamburger on one plate and brains on another plate, and they're all kind of like about everything. And he's all like, this is nothing, no big deal.
That's such a trope in movies. Yeah. Morticians eating sandwiches while cutting up dead bodies. Like,
I don't know how you can stand it.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me. Only thing that freaked me out since I've been working here is the night old Stu Walker came in. The guy who worked here, right? I say goodnight to him at the shift change. A couple hours go by, then we get a delivery from the Oceanside unit. I unzip the bag. Here's old Stu, smiling up at me, leaking seawater out his ears. Visitors, Eddie!
Come on already.
It's all just goofy. And then, of course, he knocks on the door, the thing to slide the body out. Hey, wake up in there. We're about to pull you out. And when they open the door, the inside of it's full of scratches, and he slides the thing out, and the body's gone. Oh, that's weird.
Yeah. And the door, you said full of scratches. Like, something is obviously, like, burst out of there, but they're like, huh.
Oh, that's interesting.
Where'd he go?
Right? Oh my God. Hilarious.
Everything is so obvious. Like this little story, I don't know when it happens in the movie because it cuts back and forth from the colony and back to these two investigators. But at some point they go to this enormous bookstore.
Yes.
Owned apparently by
Dick Miller's character.
Dick Miller. Yeah. I'm so excited to see him. And I want to go to this bookstore where they also sell like occult items apparently. And I think we're to believe that Dick Miller just knows everything about everything because he owns a bookstore.
That's right.
Because he's able to tell them any question that they have. He's like, oh yeah, that's lycanthropy, or that's an old Celtic. And yeah, werewolves, they don't die. They come back, but only after 3 days, and
they can regenerate.
They regenerate, just like it. Like, duh. Everybody knows this. Like, why are you so fucking stupid?
I think, to be fair, it's supposed to be an occult bookstore. But, boy, there's a lot of books on the occult that he's got in there. The dude's up on a ladder being slid around. Oh, yeah, in this book, right over here. I know exactly where it is, and he reaches for it.
They come back from the dead if you don't kill them right. Plus, they regenerate. You know what that is? Cut off an arm, cut off a leg, stick a knife in a heart. Nothing. They may look dead, but bam, 3 days later, they're as good as new.
You believe in this?
What, am I, an idiot? I'm making a buck here. You want books? I got books. I got chicken blood, I got dog embryos, I got black candles, I got wolf bane. Look at this. Silver bullets. Some joker ordered them. 3006. Never picked them up. I take Bank America, American Express, Visa. You gonna buy that or
what? But here they are for later, just in case you might need them. Oh, God.
It's so corny.
And everything, like that whole investigation is so funny because it's so obvious. Like everything points in the same direction. It's obviously werewolves.
Right.
And I feel like at some point they're like, werewolves? Maybe, I guess. Maybe.
Better go to the colony to find out.
Better go to the colony. Right. And but that's also, okay, so stuff happens at the colony. Like Karen makes a friend who like takes her around and talks about how great everything is, and they get into some misadventures. I don't know, like they find she's hearing werewolves all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, and
howling,
having these
to
weird
be
dreams. And
precise.
they go out at night, like, and find like some deer or something that have been slaughtered, and the townspeople are like, "Whoa, that's weird." And
Slim Pickens, the sheriff, right? Yeah, what? Just a good old boy. I mean, basically Slim Pickens.
yeah,
He always just plays this character.
I don't know him.
He was a cowboy, so he always plays cowboys. Well, I mean, he's most famous for Dr. Strangelove. He's the guy riding the bomb at the end of the movie.
Oh, that's okay.
But you remember Blazing Saddles? You saw Blazing Saddles, right?
Yeah,
Taggart.
it's been a really long time. Who?
Oh, yeah. He's Taggart in Blazing Saddles. One of the cowboys, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just another one of many, many familiar faces from, older Hollywood, older horror. God, so many references, and that just makes it so much fun.
Mm.
But the men are kind of hanging out with the husband, whatever his name is, Bill, and teaching him how to hunt and stuff. And then Marcia the slut, like, so Bill shoots a rabbit. And then another weirdo guy who he's like crazy eyed all the time. Just like, he just looks crazy in the face.
He's like a wolf himself, yeah.
And he's always wearing pelts and just creeping around. Oh my God. He's like,
Yeah.
My sister Marcia will cook that up for you. He's like, okay.
Okay. Marcia's cabin in the woods.
Yeah, and she's like, I'll cook it later. And then she tries to make out with him, but he pushes her away. And then he goes out into the woods. 30 seconds later is attacked by a werewolf.
Yeah.
I read that we don't know who this werewolf is. And I read that the consensus is that it was her. I assumed it was the brother.
Oh.
I assumed that the brother was like lurking out there, but whatever. Ultimately, it doesn't matter.
Could be.
He's been attacked. He goes to the doctor. They patch him up or whatever. Then he and his wife, Dee Wallace, or mistress or whoever she is, are laying in bed. And she's like, hey, you want to hey. And he's like, no, I don't feel like it. I had to get a big injection because he did. He had to get a big injection. And she's like, we never want the same things at the same time. Like, all of a sudden, had there been any tension with them before? If there had, I didn't notice it.
No, I mean, it was obviously new.
They seemed like a perfectly happy couple.
Yeah, so there's new tension, right? Like, he's acting weird. And also, like, there was a big deal in the beginning where he said he was vegetarian. He stays away from meat when he was first offered meat and he came to the colony.
Right.
And then now there's a scene where he's sitting out there and he's eating some ribs and some character apologizes. Sorry, I gave you ribs. He's like, oh, no, actually, these are quite good.
Yeah, I couldn't remember. That's after this because he gets attacked by this werewolf.
Mm-hmm. After that.
Right. And so now he's just like all the other people in town, he's got like a big slab of meat on the bone, just gnawing at it.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I love it. Oh, God, it's so silly. Like, oh, what's happening? But then all of a sudden there's this tension and he rejects her, but then she has another nightmare. She's having nightmares all the time and they're weird and trippy. And she wakes up and he's gone and she's like, whatever. And then we see him out in the forest where he meets Marcia the slut and they just stand there looking at each other. And then they just, like, I don't even remember if they say anything. Like, I think they just drop their clothes and they're totally naked.
It's a very long, sexy scene, actually. She drops her clothes very slowly and disrobes, and she's got a pretty amazing body. And then he gets naked, and then they start going at it, and then they start half-wolfing out in their faces, and they're biting, and then they lay down on the ground, and they're tossing and turning. And then, like, we get this wide shot, and suddenly they're like cartoon characters. Mm-hmm. That's unfortunate because almost all the other stuff in this movie, the effects are great, but apparently they ran out of money to get this wide shot, and Joe Dante resorted to an obviously animated silhouette of them having sex as the camera pans up to the moon and they howl.
I liked it.
It was fun. It was part of the cheese of it.
It was very 80s. Like, people did that stuff in the 80s. Do what you gotta do.
You mean animated or what?
Yeah. Like, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
What was that movie that we watched? The woman wipe.
Yeah.
Where there was a big, I don't know. We've seen
Bladed
several
wipe.
80s movies where there are like animated sequences.
Of course.
And this is really brief. It's like maybe a 3-5 second shot as it pans up like to the moon. And yes, it was an obvious departure from the style of the rest of the movie, but it didn't bother me. I was like, that's fine, whatever.
No, it was fun. The sex scene before it was pretty hot. Dee Wallace had said that Joe Dante had approached her kind of cautiously and said, crew and everybody, they really, really like you. And everybody's wondering, like, are you going to be present while your fiance is filming this scene? And she said, hell no, I'm not going to be there. And he was like, whew, that's great. And she said she just went into town and got bombed that night. Well, they
seemed very naked.
They were.
Like, I almost felt like I caught a little glimpse of balls for a second.
You did. Well, speaking of male nudity and werewolves, our Werewolf Month wouldn't be possible without guys with hair. And that's why we have a brand new sponsor this month for our Werewolf Month here on Two Guys and the Chainsaw, and that is Manscaped. Manscaped is turning out to be the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Really, below the waist, above the waist, anywhere you've got hair, Manscaped has products that are all about keeping things smooth and safe so that you can trim with confidence no matter where you need to trim. Both Craig and I were sent deluxe packages of the complete set of shaving, shavers, and accoutrements in consideration for doing these ads. And let me tell you, these are gorgeous products. The star of the show is the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. It's easy to hold. It feels real nice in your hand. It features 2 interchangeable next-gen skin-safe blade heads. There's a standard one there for taking a little off the top and a new foil blade so that you can go smooth wherever your heart desires. And thanks to their special skin-safe technology, this is guaranteed not to nick you and cut you like most of those other razors do, especially when you're going around your sensitive areas where there's a bit more skin. Also, when you're down there, it's something I never really considered before, but you can't always see the best, and these have dual LED spotlights, so you can achieve better visibility and make every trim more precise and safe and hassle-free. Trust me, you need to upgrade your trimmer to this bad boy. It's compact, it's easy to charge, feels great in your hand, and it's waterproof with all the features that I just mentioned. The best part about it is, thanks to their sponsorship of our podcast, you can get 20% off plus free shipping with the code CHAINSAW at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code CHAINSAW at manscaped.com. Show your balls some love and feel free as a dove.
The effects, the werewolf change effects are fantastic. I mean, they're practical. It's obvious makeup and prosthetics, but when I say that it's animated, I don't mean like animated, like drawn. I mean that it moves. Like there's a lot of motion to it.
Yeah.
And obviously there are a lot of cuts. There have to be a lot of cuts because you have to, cut to different phases or whatever. But I can't describe how great it is.
There's scenes where their mouth is open and they're kind of looking up and their fangs are literally growing out of their mouths. I mean, how they accomplished that. Like
the jaw protruding and like you can even see it stretching the prosthetics.
Mm-hmm.
Like the front jaw will be moving and the nose and mouthpiece will be stretching from the movement of it. It looks great. Just watch it. If you haven't seen it, just watch it. I wonder, I can't believe I haven't seen it because I know that it was always on the video store shelves. Right now, it's really not all that easy to get a hold of on streaming. You pointed me to the Internet Archive, where I was able to stream it for free. But the only other place that I was able to find it was you can buy it on Amazon for like $7.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that that's why I haven't watched it in my adulthood, because it's not everywhere. It's just not everywhere.
And that's weird, as notorious as the film is within
and all of the sequels are. I don't know you can find the sequels anywhere for free, all of them.
Yeah, it must be a rights issue that's probably tied up in something,
Okay, this just occurred to me. I wanted to talk. One of the parts that was really jarring to me was the next morning, Dee Wallace wakes up and her husband is getting dressed and she sees he's got big scratches on his back, which one couldn't have been made by a human being.
Right.
Because they're enormous. But two, she's like, what happened to those? Why do you have those scratches? And he's like, oh, I must have got them in the attack. And she's like, well, they weren't there yesterday. And they exchanged like maybe one or two more lines. before he just backhands her, like
Backhands
full force. And I was like, what? What is happening? Like there had been no indication that this guy was a bad guy. And I said that they had exchanged like a couple of back and forth lines. Like, first of all, he totally tries to gaslight her. Like, you're crazy. Like, like, you're being crazy. And she's like, no, I'm not crazy. And then he backhands her hard. And she goes down on the bed and she is like, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to have Terry take me home. Terry has come at this point. God, I don't know. And he says something like, you just don't understand. I don't even understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
Now, was he, it only just occurred to me now. Was he always a violent person, or is he a violent person now because he's a werewolf?
No, now he's the alpha wolf putting his bitch in her place. I think that's what it is. I mean, I think this is everything now that's happening is showing his change, you know? So,
okay.
You know, it was a shock to her. It's certainly a shock to us because exactly like you said, he really comes across as this sweet, nice guy who could possibly be rough if he needed to be. And now there's suddenly this side coming out of him, right?
Yeah.
Actually, really good casting, I thought.
He seems happy-go-lucky before this.
Very happy-go-lucky. He's got kind of a sweet, charming face, but then when he is now a bit menacing, he comes across as menacing. It worked for me. That's exactly what I thought was going on. Terry is going out and doing her research, and she just happens to stumble into that cabin, right? Because I don't think there was anything else leading her there.
Well, God, I don't know. She does investigating of her own, and she eventually ends up on that cliff.
Right.
And she recognizes it from the killer, Eddie, or whatever his name. She recognizes it from his drawing.
His sketch. Then
she goes, you're right. She just ends up at this cabin. Is it Slutty Marsha's cabin?
It's Slutty Marsha's cabin. I think Marsha and Eddie have been shacking up.
They're brother and sister.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, they are living in the same house.
I only found that out after watching the movie and reading about it.
Oh.
I guess they make it kind of clear that Slutty Marsha and the crazy guy in the pelts with the wild eyes, they are clearly brother and sister. But Eddie, the killer, is also their brother.
Okay. I didn't know if that was ever explicitly stated or implied in any way, shape, or form. I just figured they all lived in the same house for whatever reason.
I think they all have the same last name, but it doesn't matter. Who cares? Right. So she shows up there, and I read, as she was going up there, there's like bones hanging on strings and stuff. And I'm like, this is so Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There is some connection. Like, did the guy who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre do this too? Because I know that there are some props from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in this movie.
Oh, interesting.
But, you know, she goes in there and she finds a room that is virtually identical to the room that she found with Chris, the killer's room.
It's like the same room.
The same sketches, the same like newspaper clippings. It's like exactly the same. And then a werewolf starts breaking through the door. She's pretty badass.
Yeah, she holds her own.
Like, she dives out a window and gets into like a little hidey hole. The werewolf is trying to attack her, but she has an axe and she chops the werewolf's arm off.
Uh-huh.
Did we ever find out which werewolf that was? Did we ever see somebody? Who was it?
It was the weird guy, the other brother, I guess. Yeah, because at one point, when they're all assembled later, he shows his stump, and he's like, look what you did to me.
Okay. I assumed it was him, but I didn't remember if he ever popped up again. But she gets away then.
Yep.
She runs to Dr. Medler's office, and she calls Chris, and she's like, oh, my God. You need to come here right away.
You won't believe. They're werewolves.
Yeah, they're werewolves. And she says, and I think the doctor's in on it. And he's like, does the doctor have a file cabinet? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, look at the files. Who cares? Okay. So she starts looking at the files, but apparently, unbeknownst to her, a 12-foot tall werewolf has been hiding behind the file cabinet. Because it jumps out and kills her. Like bites out her jugular.
It's pretty gross.
While Chris is listening on the other end of the phone.
Poor guy.
Oh boy.
So he packs up and grabs his silver bullets and comes to the colony.
Yeah, he makes a quick trip to the bookstore, grabs those silver bullets, and gets on the road in his Mazda.
I got the impression that the colony must be this like distant place, but they can get there awfully quickly. So maybe it's not so far away from town after all. But
I don't know.
Karen, for some reason, I guess because she's planning on leaving and she needs to swing by the doctor's office, right, for something.
Yeah. This all happens really fast.
It really intensifies quickly. She comes into the office and Eddie's still there, but now he's not in wolf form anymore. He's in kind of almost there.
She finds her friend's body and seems slightly upset about it.
And not like, oh my God, I need to get the hell out of here.
Like, she finds her best friend's mutilated body and she's like, oh. And she just kind of like looks at it wistfully like, darn, I really needed a ride.
Dang it. I was really hoping this wouldn't happen. And then very calmly turns around and starts to dial on the phone, and that's when she gets attacked. I mean, if I were her, I would have immediately run out of there, not knowing where this guy is, because he is in there.
He pops up from like under a sheet, like
Yeah.
he was pretending to be a body or something. I don't know. Whatever.
It's almost like it was her body, and then she turned around to go to the phone, and he knocked her body off the table and secretly positioned himself under a sheet. But this is where we get his full-on transformation right in front of her, and it's impressive. Now, the thing I've got to say about it is, on its own, it's very impressive. This scene goes on for like 5 minutes, this transformation.
It's long.
We see every stage, and the bladders are popping out on his face.
Yeah.
You know, you see the movement. It's actually really cool and good. It's that classic monster movie situation where she just stands there in the corner screaming, while he just stands in front of her and goes through all this stuff.
No, she's not screaming. She's looking at him like she's fascinated and hot. Like, like her reactions to everything are so weird. Like,
It is.
she could attempt to run away, but she doesn't. She just stands there, and she's not really. I mean, there's some fear in her face, but it's not just fear. There's also fascination and like wonder, and
Yeah.
like she's kind of into it, just like she was kind of into it the first time.
Maybe she's...
Because apparently he was kind of partially transformed. He kind of in that porno room.
Yeah.
That's what she saw, but she can't remember it. And so now she's seeing it again.
To be fair, is he like are the werewolves kind of somewhat hypnotic? You know, in the way that vampires are kind of hypnotic, in the way that the March of the Slut was?
Well, in this movie, first of all, as it turns out, these werewolves are werewolves, but they don't follow the normal rules. Silver bullets work, apparently, but they are just shapeshifters who can change whenever they want at will.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a full...
No, I think in this movie, it's like vampires, like they kind of have like thrall.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very sexual.
Yes.
It's much like that Little Red Riding Hood movie that we watched.
Yeah, Company of Wolves with Angela Lansbury.
Yeah, like the wolf part is kind of like the sexual animal inside, and I think that there's something that appeals to even, well, to Dee Wallace and to her husband. Her husband rejected it until he was bitten. I think that she's drawn to this animal sexuality, even though this guy, the Eddie guy, is so gross. Like, he's super ugly. They make him super ugly anyway.
Yeah.
But he fully transforms and she's, enthralled. But then I guess when he lunges at her, she has a handy jar of acid that she throws in his face.
Yeah, right behind her. Yeah, that she kind of grabbed. Yeah. This is, we saw that in Seed of Chucky now, too, by the way. Throwing acid on some. Well, I was going to say two other things about this. Like what you were saying about the sexuality, that is what this movie is sort of credited with doing, is making werewolves sexy. And that has carried through to modern day. I mean, obviously there's Twilight and all that, where the vampires and werewolves are both very sexy. I don't know if you know this, but with my voice acting, one of my very regular gigs is reading dramatic audiobooks, recording them for these niche genre places. There are whole platforms online, and it is very, very popular genre right now of what we all affectionately call werewolf porn.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, essentially it's just basically these sort of seductive males, 50 Shades of Grey type deals or like Twilight type deals. But it exists in this universe called the Omniverse that has been created through fan fiction online basically over the last decade or so by some prominent authors, many of whom are self-published on Amazon and are making millions right now. Obviously, these platforms are making millions. They're doing TikTok dramas now that my friends here in China are acting in, and I will probably get cast in one or two of these eventually. These very sordid soap opera type, 1.5 minute long, 52 episode type deals. The hot new thing, you heard it here first, Craig. Much of the themes of this is werewolves. And it's these werewolf packs, and there's an alpha wolf, and he's trying to get his omega, and they have to protect her, and it's just very sexual, and they bite each other. It's funny because as I was watching this movie, I'm just like, yeah, this all tracks. Like, who would have thought, what is this, 50 years later that we'd be seeing the same stuff now, and I would be so deeply into this, into the production side of it anyway. It's kind of crazy. So this movie kind of kicked that all off for you youngins out there who might be into this sort of thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I thought compared to an American Werewolf in London, what I really admire about the way that John Landis handled it in American Werewolf London was how judicious he was. I think that transformation scene is more arresting and impressive than this very complicated and technically astounding 5-minute long transformation scene, simply because, to be honest with you, maybe about 2 minutes into it, I was kind of like, well, it's not done yet? I mean, whereas the Landis thing, there were so many close-ups, and every shot really counted. Like, you see that moss stretch out, and it's slow, and it happens, and then it's done. And you see those backbones kind of pop out of his back, and his legs bend into position just once. And it's enough. I mean, I thought that was an intense scene. This, arguably, it's got more stuff going on, which you could almost say is more impressive. And it certainly doesn't look any cheaper. But because it lingers so long and it's got so much, I felt like it was a bit much. And I didn't think it was as scary.
I don't know if we would feel the same way if we hadn't just watched the other one. They're really not dissimilar, except for a couple of things. Like, there are in American Werewolf in London, there are a lot more full body shots. And like seeing him there naked on the ground,
right,
and things happening to his whole body. And the other thing that is different is that in American Werewolf in London, this happened, like, the lights are on. Like,
that's true.
He's just in his girlfriend's apartment and the lights are on. So we're seeing everything.
Yeah.
In this, I mean, it's lit, but it's kind of lit from like light from a window, like moonlight,
it's dramatic.
From a window.
Yeah, it's dramatic.
It's darker, but they're both good. I mean, they're comparable, but I think that the people behind both of them were very skilled. It's ironic that they came out so close together.
Yeah.
Things go kind of crazy at this point, right? Like, what happens? She throws the acid in his face, and then she just runs to her car, which is the logical thing to do. But the locals, that's what I started calling them at this point, the locals stop her, and they're like, no, you got to come with us. And they drag her to this barn where Marcia the slut is like standing behind a table that with the body of Terry. Is that Terry?
It's like a sacrificial altar almost, this whole cabin.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
All of the locals are just like standing like they're going to do a production of Cats or something. And like some of them are wolfed out, I think, and some of them aren't. And
it's the classic cult confrontation scene. It's like the end of Rosemary's Baby. It's like The Sentinel. It's like, how many movies have we seen like this where, oh, surprise at the end, everybody was in on it, and it's a big cult, and we're trying to initiate everyone.
Well, and it's not a surprise at all. We've known this from the beginning.
Yeah.
But now she's finding out, and they're all, God, I don't remember. It gets nuts. There's a fight with the locals are fighting with each other because the doctor the rest of them are mad. Crazy old Ezra, or whatever his name was, Carradine.
Yeah.
He's like,
we should have stuck with the old ways. Raising cattle for our feed. Where's the life in that?
The humans are our cattle.
Humans are our prey. We should feed on them like we always done. Screw all this channel your energies crap.
But the danger of exposure. We need the shelter plan to catch up with society. Times have changed, and we haven't. Not enough.
Shut up, Doc.
Marcia the slut agrees with him. She's talking to the doctor. He's like, you lied to us. You said that we could live among them, and blah, blah, blah. And so now they're totally revolting. And I guess that the plan, the doctor brought Karen here because he wanted her to be part of their community.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. Like, did he want her to come live there permanently, or was he trying to change her? And he also says that that's why he brought the husband along too, because he was like, we thought that the husband could convince you. Yeah. Once he was turned, he could convince you. But or was it like to just like get a werewolf in a prominent position on TV?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, because the way the movie starts out is the interview with the doctor, and he's written this book, right, about the wolf, about the beast within all of us and our animal primal instincts and things. I get the sense that the doctor's mission here and the way that he's, taking them out of the old ways into the new is he's got this idea that, the werewolves need to evolve. They need to kind of be a little more proactive and get out there and in front of society instead of hiding in the shadows. And so he's like priming the pump. He's out there. He's written this book. He's a prominent psychologist. He's got this colony going on. He's inviting people out. And because she is the more, like you said, public figure, somewhere I don't think it's really fully explained, but it seems like there's this nebulous idea that he's going to use her as a spokesperson for them. But that does beg the question, then what about this Eddie guy? Why is he out there murdering people left and was he just kind of a loose cannon? Or was he part of the plan? I don't know.
I don't know. But whatever. So Marcia the slut is like, she's ours now. Like, I think they want to eat her. That's the plan. But Chris shows up, finally. He had some gas station problems, but he finally shows up. And he's got the gun, and all of the townspeople are like, ha ha, we're not scared of you. Like, he confronts Eddie first, and actually Eddie gets his gun away from him and then monologues to him for like 2 minutes and like taunts him about, yeah, I murdered your wife. What he's saying is, I murdered your wife, but the subtext is, I fucked your wife. Yeah. Like, that's how he's taunting him. Yeah. The bad guy gets the gun, and then he's like, here, have it back. Yeah. I don't care, because they think they're invincible, I guess, or whatever. And so Chris shoots him with the silver bullet and he dies immediately.
Yeah, they're like, oh shit, he really does have silver bullets. They say something too, like, right, silver bullets. Like, and then he shoots him. They're like, oh shit. It's almost like they didn't believe that silver bullets existed or that this guy would have the wherewithal to have them, right? So that was funny.
And they're all like half wolfed out at this point. Like, it's crazy. Yeah. And at first they're very menacing and they're surrounding him. But then he shoots like 2 or 3 of them, and he and Karen corral them into the barn and lock up the barn and burn it down. And there's a lot of them in there, but I'm thinking, are they all in there? And I'm also thinking, like, they're pounding on these like barn doors and they're so flimsy. And these wolves have like been bursting through doors and walls through the whole movie. I'm like, why can't they get out now? It doesn't make any sense.
Don't tell me there's only one door to this barn, no windows. What's going on, right?
And a bunch of them burn out.
Apparently, while they were filming this outdoor, this climactic scene, all their power equipment went out. And Dante was like, oh, shit, this is going to put us behind. It's going to put us behind budget. But then he remembered something that Roger Corman used to say constantly when they were on the set, talking about how you just make things work. And one of the anecdotes he would always say was, back in my day, we would light scenes with car headlights. So he actually lit this sequence where they're burning the barn down outside with car headlights. And while he was doing that, Dante is standing next to, John Carradine, who by this point has literally shot like over 300 movies, right? And he turns to him and he goes, well, this isn't going to be the best movie that you've ever been in. And Carradine turns to him and goes, well, it's certainly not the worst one either.
It's funny.
Kind of nice.
Dick Miller, apparently this is his favorite movie that he ever did.
Really?
He's not even in it very much.
He makes an impression, though. That's the thing about Dick Miller, except for, no, I think even including Little Shop of Horrors, the original one, I don't think he's ever done like a leading role. He's always a guy who comes in for a couple scenes and then is done, right?
So they get in the car and they drive away, but they get stopped in the road by the sheriff, who is also a werewolf. There's a showdown with the cop and because their car runs out of gas when they're stopped. And so they have to take the cop car. So they kill the sheriff. I guess Chris shoots him, but it's weird because I thought that he had used his gun to block the doors, the barn doors, but maybe I'm mistaken. I don't know. Anyway, and then, so they get in the cop car and he can't get it started. And meanwhile, all these other werewolves are attacking the car for a long time. Like, how long does it take to break a car window? Come on. But he eventually gets the car started. They shoot a couple of the werewolves off. But as they're driving away, one has burst in through the back window and it bites her, and then they shoot it, and then she's crying and they look in the back and it's Bill. It was her husband. But
that's right.
He's dead now. She says something like, we have to tell the world. People need to know. And he's like, yeah. It cuts to, I don't know, some point in the future where she is getting made up to go on air.
Yes.
And I think he's her producer.
Yeah.
And I only know that because I watch that Reese Witherspoon show on Apple Plus about a TV show, and they all have like their individual producers. I think he's her
specific.
The morning show.
Gotcha.
I think he's her producer, and he puts her out there, and she's supposed to be doing a story on the fire at the colony, but she immediately goes off script and she's reading something else, and you'll probably just put it in, but it's something about how, there's a secret society and everybody needs to know about it. And so I'm here to reveal it today.
Yep.
And then, I love this part because the beginning of her transformation is kind of just her being like, and I'm reading. I'm also kind of convulsing. And then she turns into a pretty werewolf.
It's so tonally odd because she seems that she's in pain, and there's these knowing looks between the two of them while this is happening. And at one point when she wolfs out, she, turns her head sideways and her face just looks incredibly pained. And there's a tear that runs down her eye.
Yeah.
It's rather sad. I remember when I first saw this, I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. Because she's basically sacrificing herself, because the minute she wolfs out, he is waiting there with his gun and his silver bullets and he shoots her. So all this happens on live television in front of everyone.
Right.
It's really sick, it's sick and tragic. And then everybody who's watching it is like, we get shots of the people in bar watching it and stuff like that. And like, oh, the great things they can do with special effects nowadays. So nobody believes them.
Some people do, some people don't. I mean, we see, like there are kids watching the news. Like it cuts to a bunch of different people. But I think you're right. I think the consensus is that it was a stunt.
I think that's the general impression we're meant to be left with in the movie, is that, all this happened for naught, because nobody believes it anyway. Like, what's it going to take?
Right. Well, I mean, there is the one guy in the bar, and he's drunk, so maybe it's because he's drunk. But he's like, no, she turned into a werewolf, and he shot her. And then it pans to another guy who's like, whatever, it's just a stunt. And he's like, hey, get me a cheesesteak and a burger for the lady. And it pans over, and the lady is Marsha the Slut. And the cook is like, how do you want your burger? It's like, rare. And then we get to watch this burger cook over the credits. I watched the whole thing. I'm like,
oh, getting hungry.
I felt like if I wasn't watching, I was going to miss something. So I watched that burger cook through the whole, and then nothing happens with it. And then it cuts to a scene from an old movie. And I don't know if there was any relevance to that.
I think that was the original Wolfman.
Obviously, some of the people from the colony or whatever, some of the werewolves have survived and they're still out there. Okay, great, whatever. I did want to mention that the designer, Dee Wallace, didn't want to be an ugly werewolf. She wanted to be a pretty werewolf. And so they had to do a specific design for her. And she does look very different than the other werewolf.
She does.
She looks more like herself. The design of her werewolf look kind of looks like Dee Wallace. The other werewolves just look like werewolves. I haven't seen this movie, but I've seen trailers and I've seen the poster. These werewolves remind me of the werewolves from Dog Soldiers, which I think is another movie that we should consider.
I agree. I agree.
For this month. Yeah. So this movie is wild. Like it is so weird. Like it just has WTF stamped all over it. And at the same time, it's enjoyable and fun. It moves. I felt like it moved. It's so strange and weird tonally, and like, is it a thriller? Is it a comedy? Like it. And when I read that they wanted to bring some of the piranha sensibility to it, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that means it's going to be silly. And it is in places, but I would say that it's far more subtle.
Yeah.
Than at least than I remember piranha being. I remember piranha being really silly.
It's pretty silly, but also like it does descend into camp. I mean, that whole bit at the end where everybody's confronting her, it's so campy.
Yeah,
but
I know. I liked it though.
But I liked it.
But you're right. I mean,
that's my point though. It goes all over the place.
It's not really all that unique. Those things could have just been backwoods cultists.
Yeah.
They could have been anything. We've seen this a million times where it's the Wicker Man. It's any time.
Yeah.
It's a whole society of people, a conspiracy against an individual or whatever. We've seen it a bazillion times. These just happen to be werewolves. And it is campy. I'm not disagreeing. It is campy. I'm just saying that campiness doesn't bother me. In fact, I kind of enjoy it. It's fun.
Well, I think especially for its time, it was a bit hipper. I mean, maybe through today's eyes, it seems a little less sophisticated, but in a way, it had a bit of self-awareness. It had a lot of winkiness, but it also was a serious thriller at times. It delved into very deep and very adult themes. It's very gritty in the beginning. We're talking sexuality and the animalistic nature of people and the beast within and the sex. And then, the very accomplished makeup effects that are very impressive even today.
Sure.
And I think that's why it was so well received, was for that reason. It was so different for its time. Now it seems a little like a less sophisticated version of the similar kind of stuff that we see now. Now it's like a little more cynical and jokey. This, like you said, is a little more subtle at times. So,
yeah. 7 sequels.
Wow.
7 sequels and a remake in development. Andy Muschietti is set to direct the remake of The Howling. Now, it's in like very early stages. He's connected at this point. If he ends up actually doing it, who knows? But
I would love to see some sequels, actually. I think I read a little bit like this. Oh, like it was the one you said, I think the 4th one that takes it back to more of like the original novel, which Dante wasn't terribly impressed with.
Yeah.
I'd be kind of curious.
One of the things that I forgot to mention that I laughed out loud was one of the people who sees her change on TV is Dick Miller. And his response, I laughed out loud. He's watching it and his response is, oh boy.
Classic Dick Miller.
Oh boy. I thought that was so funny.
It sure was.
Anyway, we should wrap it up. I liked it. It was a good movie. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it, especially if you're a big horror fan. It's absolutely chock full of Easter eggs.
Oh, God.
You should watch it immediately.
Yep, absolutely everything you just said. I can't believe... Well, I think younger Todd fell asleep at the slower parts. A lot of this went over younger Todd's head as well. So, younger Todd just went into a movie with certain expectations that if they weren't met, sometimes he just got distracted. But older Todd was like, oh my God, this movie's got everything in it. It's a lot of fun. And I was really excited to see where it went because I had forgotten so much about it. So
there's also tons of behind the scenes things that we just didn't have time to talk about, but that are very interesting.
Yeah.
And so if you are interested in that kind of stuff, you should check it out. Check out their Wikipedia page. Check out the IMDb.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening to our little werewolf series. If you enjoyed it and you have some werewolf fans among your friends, send them a link to our podcast. What a great time to bring them in. Just have them Google Two Guys and a Chainsaw and leave us a review at any of the places where you listen to your podcast, Apple Podcasts, or even on our website, and let us know what you thought of this film. And give us some ideas for werewolf movies we should do in the future. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.